It's good?
Well, Steve, only you could actually get it.
I like the movie. It's actually like direct the conversation towards race.
Yeah, like Papa's not contributing.
He's just crazy.
That's not like policies in disgrace.
I have no idea what policy. What is exactly not listening?
Yeah.
It's about cheese. Okay. What's your favorite kind of cheese? Cheddar.
Red, is it red Leicester?
Yes, I like it. I really love that.
Yeah. What about you?
So I don't write down cheese now.
That's an equity
Cheese.
I think it's a root problem.
My favorite now.
They one.
Yeah.
Yeah, they won. It's not like any of us.
Something like timing. Thank you very much. Cool, let's crack on then, because otherwise we'll get shouted at being late. Welcome to round 2 of LSE 2019. My name is Josh. Key day is fine. Judging with me are
Jason, no preference.
Ishar, key day, please.
cool. In opening government.
First is Yashi.
Second half key day. Opening up.
Jason speaking second key day.
Closing gov.
You're speaking first, really.
Tony speaking second key please. Closing up.
Steve.
Sorry, extended. Yes.
Good to hear with Steve.
Wow.
Shield.
You see last month.
That's
Tom?
true, you did expect.
Are we being live streamed?
Was it on the platform?
This
Yeah,
should
we are.
supposed to be a live stream, but should we do consent?
Does everybody consent?
Yes.
I consent, yeah. You should voice your opposition now.
Oh, wow. Take out those things.
Get to it.
What are you
No
planning to
fucking
say?
up, okay?
Man, you can't use that word. You're not allowed to.
Change it on right now. Probably. It's now just gone to explicit. So, without further ado, prop 1.
The introduction of advanced placement classes in the United States was a new era of segregation. Because if you look at the composition of the kinds of classes that will get students into Harvard, Stanford, or any kind of higher education really, they look suspiciously white and very much like classrooms in the Jim Crow era used to look like. This is the reality when you as an African American parent send your child to a mixed school or a mostly white school. We're going to be talking to you about 3 different things. One, why we think sending your child to an Afrocentric school is going to improve their academic performance. Second, how it's going to teach them to value themselves and celebrate their culture and identity in a country where Black identities are constantly under attack. And lastly, we're going to teach you how if you want to integrate with white people, the last person you should ask or get information from as to how to do that is a white person. Before that, some framing as to what we think this debate is about. For the sake of having a clean debate, we're going to hope that everyone in this debate accepts that this is not a debate about either sending your kid to a white, posh school or sending your kid to a terrible, black-centric one. We think that the reality is that if you are a poor parent, you could either send them to a poor white school that probably doesn't perform very well, or a poor black school that has similar standards, or if you are a rich African-American person, you could send them to a posh black school or a posh white school. Ultimately, we say that performance is similar, so it's more about the kind of curriculum, the language, the kinds of role models that you get in those schools. Let's then move on to our first argument. Why do we, given these constraints, think that you still get improved academic performance regardless of circumstances? We think there are 3 reasons why students mostly get academic performance improvements. I'm going to talk about mechanistic reasons within those. The first one is confidence. I think that when you are a confident student, it means that you have the ability to engage in class, to ask teachers questions when you don't understand, to perform extracurricular activities, but importantly, to also put yourself forward for the kinds of positions that show leadership and that are going to help you get a job in the future, things such as class president, like helping out teachers, like research assistants. I think that the problem when you send your kid to a mixed school is that it's very rare that you get these kinds of situations where you're confident. The first one is because you have internalized racism, because in a society that constantly only shows white people in positions of power, and you see kids who look like that, who look so bright, so shiny, who speak in a different way than African American vernacular, you're not going to want to compete with those kids because you don't think that you're going to be able to. You're going to be embarrassed by your accent. You're going to be embarrassed by the color of your skin. It means that you don't compete with those kids, that you don't ask a white teacher those kinds of questions. But importantly, it also means that you lack role models. When the positions of authority in your school do not look like you, then you do not feel like you can trust them, but also importantly, you do not think that you can be like them at some point in the future. You lack the confidence to learn properly. The second reason why we think that people learn is importantly because you require constant teacher support. Because the kinds of things that again get you a job or get you into higher education are things like teacher references, but also how teachers grade some things that are just subjective. How teachers grade an essay is going to vary very radically if you are in an African American only school or if you are in a white school. The reason for that is again because teachers also have internalized stereotypes, right? It has been proven in multiple studies that when you have mixed children, people that have black-centric names or that look black are overwhelmingly just going to be graded as less intelligent or get lower grades precisely because teachers have that kind of composition, because they compare them directly to white kids. That doesn't happen in your purely African American classroom, but also importantly, when you have teachers who are of the same vernacular, who speak like you, who look like you. I think that this just leads to improved academic references and grades for you. The last thing I also think is attendance. That part of the problem with like massive high school dropouts in very poor areas of the United States is precisely because you don't think that school is a safe space, because it's not a space that is for you, for people who look like you. That happens a lot more when you are the only black kid in an all-white school, or rather like more realistically, like 5 black kids in a mostly mixed school that sit together at the table, that get bullied all the time, that are constantly stereotyped to be part of gangs. Ultimately, I think that going to a school where everyone looks like you and your culture is celebrated is a good way to also improve your attendance. Overall, we think that you can improve academic performance for all of those 3 mechanistic reasons. Let's talk about the celebration of identity, which I think I already started to sort of hint at. In America, black bodies, black thoughts, and black culture is constantly under attack. I think that it's horrifying that children are brought up in a world where they're taught that they're worthless, that their culture is dead, when it makes them feel like they want to crawl out of their own skin because they are not white, because they don't fit in with what society tells them is right. At the end of the day, we think that it makes a massive difference when you go to a school that teaches you that you are valid, that you can celebrate your culture, your identity, and your people, that your existence matters, that your culture doesn't have to be fetishized in Miley Cyrus videos, that it doesn't have to be sort of wrapped into a tiny nice package for white consumerism and enjoyment. When you get better role models, when you focus on Douglas rather than on Lincoln on the curriculum for who saved the slaves in the United States, when you focus on your culture, when you don't have Black History Month and then we never mention people who look like you for the rest of the year, we think that is a celebration of your culture, your identity. But also importantly, in the kinds of groups that form within the school, the kinds of music that children are going to listen to, culture that they're going to be talked about, it doesn't have to be sort of like only rap or African Americans are seen as dirty. It doesn't have to be just Taylor Swift, the queen of everything that is what. I think that that does mean that you are going to be more confident in yourself and your identity. Closing.
The rest of their culture is still going to demonize them. So on the comparative, is it better that in those cases where they form a significant part of mixed schools, that they can influence the curriculum, meaning that white kids also get exposed to the culture?
I don't think that they're going to influence the curriculum, right? I think that in mixed schools, which is your best case scenario, you're still going to be a minority. But also, importantly, I don't think that they're going to be a particularly powerful one, given that if you give way to what one minority in your school wants, you also have to teach Arab history, Asian history, Mexican history. I think that given that, they're mostly going to stick to the curriculum of let's just teach what white people want us to teach, given that that's the given. The importance of the celebration of identity, I think, is that social mobility doesn't happen by the kilometer but by the centimeter. It's not about getting these black kids into Harvard, it's about giving them the confidence to A, have an improved sense of identity that they can think on for the rest of their life, but also give them the confidence to do things like actually apply to higher education. That doesn't happen when you believe what society tells you. Last point on integration. The reason why I can tell ESL speakers this is what you need to do to be TPL people is because I know it, because I went through it, because I had to experience it, because if like Matt went and said, you don't, like your accent is terrible and I can't understand you, it'd be pretty racist, but if I say it, it's more fine. I think that there's 3 reasons, right? The first one is that teachers in African American schools actually know the racism. White people don't know that they're being racist, but they still are, right? You cannot point at that. The second one is that overall, they have used those skills themselves to advance themselves in the workplace, but lastly, because they know how to work the system. I think that all of these reasons mean that they're better able to teach black kids to integrate into a society that systematically tries to push them out. Overall, it is just so much better to send your kids to an Afrocentric school. Please propose.
If they had wanted to, the African American community always had the option to stand apart. They didn't fight for that. What they wanted was the opportunity and the capacity to not just be a part of American culture as a whole, but get involved with it, to change it, to be in the community and get involved in the same way that any other person in that community could. The only thing that opening government believes they're improving to sacrifice that basic connection to American life, or this broad life, in the way that every other person gets, is that they believe that you'll have better role models and marginal improvements to your education. What I'm going to talk you through in this speech is why they sacrifice a tremendous amount of other things that are important to education in pursuit of that, and why they do a tremendous amount of social damage in pursuing that. Before I get into that though, I want to clarify one very specific thing. It is important to recognize that this motion does not allow government to create more of these schools. They attend them as and where it is possible. And I think there are two important observations you can make about where these schools are likely to do this. Either they are in richer areas or people have set up one with the explicit purpose of having that stand apart, or it is likely to be just in a poorer area where there's a large amount of these people, and then by nature, like a lot of people have gone to certain schools, and the curriculum has evolved over time. These are not focused or pursued products in these poorer areas that have education set up in the perfected way that opening government needs to get a lot of their benefits. It's just a school like any other that happens to incidentally have a large influx of these people. First thing, on academic performance. The first thing that opening government said is the environment for these people is set up to fail. First of all, notice that by virtue of the fact that these are likely to be schools in areas where there is a large population of African Americans, even in the mixed schools, then a few things are true. First of all, it is likely that some of your teachers or the staff members of that school are likely to be African American as well. People who can be those role models, who will get involved and make those conversations and try to change the cultural way that opening government was so afraid of. Second of all, it is likely that a large number of the children in your class are likely to be African American, which means you're not the only African American in a classroom who is left behind and forced to be quiet because people have bullied you. It means there is a diverse community of people who give you that support and capacity to speak up. I'm not saying that it's perfected. I'm saying that the strength of the argument they claim in this situation is not predominating. It shouldn't be decisive in terms of what you think the most important thing to get out of education is, because that is one attribute to many things that are important to get out of school. And more importantly, even to the extent that some people choose to leave these environments as and where they are able, that means that for the people that are left behind, by which by nature there must be some, because some people, not everyone can leave, they magnify those effects for those people who do not have the option, because by virtue of their argument, it is only strong in the cases where there are not additional people able to give that support. But what effects actually do predominate and are important for a person's education? I think, first of all, the reputation of the school that you go to matters. I will give the example, for instance, of Morehouse College, a university that is set up with an intention, by and large, reflecting the intention of opening government in this debate. That university does not have the same reputation or the same prestige as other comparable institutions, by and large, for the fact that it was set up with a particular racial and cultural agenda motivating it. That is something that means that people don't perceive it as an educational institution that's trying to educate people in the same way. They view it as sort of a proprietor of a cultural perception. And as an educational institution, you're trying to convince people that you are someone who is taught in a certain way and has a skill set to get into university or get into a job. That makes it less likely that you have that basic standard given to you. The comparison for them is a lot of people going to schools where the qualification matters less. But second of all, and very critically, I think it is a mistake to presume the most important thing to get out of a school is a good grade at the end of it. Think about it. For the vast majority of people, what happens after you go out and finish school? You probably don't go to university by and large. You probably have to get a job in your local community. What predominates and matters for your capacity to get a job and get involved in that community? It's who you know. Whether you went to school with those people, whether you're a part of that community and have the connections and the capacity to actually convince someone they should hire you and trust you. That connection and that trust does not exist fundamentally when you have chosen to segregate yourself into a school that by and large would be perceived as separate from the remainder of that community. You have not connected with these people, and therefore it is less likely that you get a job. They, at best, marginally improve the grades of some people, but sacrifice the integrity of that qualification and sacrifice the actual tangible things that you want those qualifications to lead towards, which makes it far less likely that these things will work out for the best for them. Second of all, I want to talk about engaging with racism as an additional thing that is important for these children to learn in this school. Sort of the definition of the problem that opening government is trying to set up is that there are certain people who will treat you unfairly and in a negative way as a result of your race or the culture that you come from. Finding the correct way to address that and knowing how to deal with that situation, knowing how to navigate those interactions and make them and minimize the effect those things have on you is critical for people in those situations. If you spend your entire childhood years not engaging with that environment, not learning how to confront white people as and where it is necessary for you to do, not learning how to use the tools that are at your disposal in institutions to confront racism or point things out. When you enter the workforce, which by and large does not have the protections they're trying to guarantee in those situations, you are less equipped to make those steps. So again, it's an instance where, without any justification as to why the grade that you get was the most important thing, they've sacrificed virtually every other attribute that could be important for your education in the pursuit of that. The second thing I want to talk about is the broader cultural effects of the sorts of things that we're talking about. Now, opening government's case on this is that, it's very important you have some kind of focus in your culture, that your history is a big part of your life and you get to see that. I would point out, first of all, that nothing prevents you from learning about your culture in all of these secondary things that go on outside of your life. You can be part of a community centre, you can have friends and family, you can go to activities where you will learn about the history. Black History Month is a thing in the United States. There is no deficit of capacity to learn that your culture is important and valued and have avenues to pursue and learn. I'll take you in a second and learn about how that is relevant and important to the community. What they decide is that this should predominate in your life, that this is the only lens you should be able to see yourself through. Good shot.
As a parent, it is a horrific burden to place on your child that they should learn about racism and how to face racists since a very, very young age. The role of parents is to protect them, which is why they shouldn't send their children to predominantly white schools where they're going to face this kind of racism.
The mistake you're making is to presume that protecting someone or doing the right thing by them protects them from all harm at all times. At some point, they need to get out into the real world. Making the harm minimal at an early age might seem nicer to them, but if it hurts them in the long run, it is not a kindness, it is a cruelty to inflict upon these people. What I want to talk about, why it is bad to make people isolated. First of all, I want to point out very quickly that their policy necessarily prevents a lot of additional social change. It is less likely that black teachers will be in white schools and making positive changes towards pushing the curriculum because they'll get sucked into the African American schools they want. It's less likely that black students will be in those classrooms pushing to say, my history is important too, which means the average person by and large in the street has less awareness of these sorts of issues, which is far more important for determining policy, determining what people vote on, what actually changes in society, because they've dragged out all the avenues to actually make those changes. But more critically, even the minds of the children themselves, this policy prevents them from having a choice as to whether their African American identity is central to who they want to be or not. It defines that their education and the entirety of their childhood is centered around a race identity that does not need to be the core of their identity, but which they have decided should be. Like, the abiding memory, I think, of most people, from the civil rights movement is sort of, I have a dream, like, I want people to be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Their policy throws away all of the progress made in that end in the pursuit of the facile claim that we're going to improve someone's test scores. We oppose.
Speaker for speech. This speech rather, not prop 2.
That's being straight, so I'll be a little nicer to be sure. Right. I think it is laughable for John to suggest that it is this, above all else, above all the racism that they will face in their everyday lives when they go to other places outside the hours of 8 to 3 p.m, when they see leaders on TV who are predominantly white, a president who doesn't respect them, members of their community being shot openly in the streets. It is going to this school that reminds these children that they are black and therefore different. No, John, that is not the case. They are not as different because of the way that the rest of society treats them. What we offer them is a safe haven. It is not just the case that we give them marginally better educational scores, as you seem to think was the only argument Lucia made, ignoring the other two about culture and identity and why that is so important. That is not the trade-off that we are making. We say that these people are likely to get better grades, but crucially, they're likely to have much better lives as a result of it. We don't think that John knows what is best for the youth, but we think conversely, I, as alternative white man, know what is better. So, two things in this speech, a bunch of rebuttal to John, and then I want to talk about safe spaces and necessity for them, why this is a unique benefit that we bring. This goes above and beyond like any, yes John, I know you don't think safe spaces matter, but that's probably a bigger character flaw than So, right, framing. Firstly, John's attempt at nuance wants to be in was these schools can be in two places, rich places or poor places. I'm not sure what that adds to this debate. Beyond saying that there's a wide variety in which these circumstances can exist, I think the reason why you would set up these schools is precisely because you have a specific ethos. Maybe there's some funding sources you can draw on, but even above that, you control the board. All the governors are black. All of the teachers are black, not just some of them, which means you can control what the curriculum is. It's not just there are some black teachers who can teach the white curriculum, but these people get to decide the ethos, the culture of the school, be that in rich places, be that in poor places, we're fine with both. He says, the alternative is mixed schools, and there are some black kids and some white kids, and it's all great. The problem here is twofold. Firstly, I think that there is still a large degree to which I internalize that racism when I see that, yes, there are a bunch of white kids and a bunch of black kids, but it's always the white kids who are class president, valedictorian, selected for the honour roll or the AP class, which is drilled into me from a young age. When, yes, there are some black teachers, but ultimately, I do not get to choose the curriculum, or rather, they don't get to choose the curriculum. They're still controlled overwhelmingly by the rich people in their school, by the politically active, by the powerful, by the board of angry housewife PTAs, which is going to be overwhelmingly white and probably overwhelmingly Republican. I think, therefore, that it's not true. I think the second thing he said was, that you have this weird harm over if you leave this school, what about the people who are left behind? A couple of responses to this. Firstly, I think insofar as you as an African American could reasonably leave your poor mixed school to go to the poor African American school, probably all of the other African American kids do, because the schools are functionally in the same place. Insofar as there's some kind of monetary cost to doing so, maybe the rich people leave, but I still think that is fine. The second thing I'd say is that I'm really unclear that I have any obligation as an African American parent to better the whole community as a whole, and not to look out for the child that I have chosen against their will to bring into this world, to birth them into a cacophony of racism and abuse. I think my primary duty is to ensure that they have a good life, and it's unclear that even if it was true that this would better the circumstances of other children, which I'm not sure that is a mechanism given in OG. It's just there will be some proximity, therefore they'll all be friends and sing rainbows, ignoring the last 60 years of structural racism in America and why this has never got better. Then they say Morehouse is a terrible school because it's not as good as Harvard or something. That's just a lie. Morehouse is one of the most respected liberal arts colleges in America. It's comparable to Amherst, to Williams, to Wheaton. And precisely because maybe not in its initial founding, but over time that reputation was built up. No reason why we cannot achieve these reputational benefits. And similarly, no reason why we even get the reputational benefits in the mixed schools. He just kind of says we do because they're in the same school. I think often these benefits are unlikely to be transferred onto the black students of the mixed school. They're likely to be held back to the white majority. Lastly, he says they need to learn to deal with racism. This argument is absurd. One, they spend time in the outside world. Two, if I want to teach someone self-defense, I don't repeatedly punch them in the face. I functionally teach them how to defend themselves. I think being taught how to deal with racism is, as Lucia pointed out, much easier to do when you have a bunch of black teachers telling you this is my experience, this is how I dealt with it. This is unfortunately how you have to deal with the police. Contrast white school, where it's going to be very much the other way around. You know, random locker searches, where coincidentally it's always the black kid who gets his locker searches, where all lives matter and black lives matter is taught as equal, co-important ideas. So I don't think it's true. I don't think this leads to isolationism. I don't think John has proved that. He's just said if we put them all together, everything will be fine. All he did was rubbish our model and provided no substantive reason of his own. So, safe spaces, why are they important? Firstly, because as a parent, my primary duty is always to my child because I'm the only one who can look after them. They had no say in being born, but I made them anyway, probably as a vanity project, or maybe I just didn't do my contraception right, who fucking knows. But the point is they're there, and I'm solely responsible to them. Secondly, there's probably a broad trend in the USA towards better racial treatment in 10, 15 years' time. More quotas, that kind of shit. The reason why this is important is that the overwhelming brunt of the abuse my kids are likely to face, they're going to face now in the immediate short term, which means I'm probably fine sacrificing a small amount of quote-unquote integration on behalf of opening opposition to have better treatment in the here and now where they face the majority of their abuses. What are these? And because also they're going to be exposed to this kind of racism outside of school. Any kind of faux integration could probably happen on our side of it anyway. But I think because school is such a formative part of your identity, and because it's a vicious cycle, right? If my kid gets bullied racially for 1 year at school, they're behind in that year, they're behind in the next year, it trickles down, they fuck up their GCSEs, they fuck up their A-levels, and then they go to a good university, or the American equivalents of their own. But the point is that school is additive, and if you miss up and screw up 1 year, you're truant because you're being bullied for 1 month. What you lose, you will never be able to catch up, and you will always be behind. What are these closing? No, that's closing. Opening? after. Well, never mind. So, we didn't offer a single POI in the whole of our case, so, you know, go with it. Attempt to frame this out, it'll be fun. So, what are the harms of this? Firstly, things like direct bullying. Secondly, just things like microaggression. I think it's much less likely that you'll have a white kid president or a bunch of kids wearing MAGA hats in our happy African American school. I think you're not going to have structural and false equivalence. You're not going to have all lives matter and black lives matter being presented as equal. You're not going to have an overwhelmingly white board of governors or school board telling you that you must teach these particular things. I think this isn't going to happen in African American schools for the reasons that Lucia gave you, that you're going to have much more specific training. You're going to have counselors who recognize the issues that young black men face and don't just rubbish them off as like, oh, you know, you'll be fine. They don't just immediately think the problem is that they're doing drugs or involved in gangs. They're going to uplift them, understand their concerns and help them deal with it. And above all, teach them to deal with the kind of racism that John wants them to be able to learn to fight against. I think all of these things are done that much better when they're coming from a place of empathy, of lived experience and honesty, rather than a place of, oh, here comes the black problem kid again, I wonder what trouble he's in this week. Ultimately, these schools are better for these children, educationally, culturally, and for their life. We think it's so important, we don't think they've given us any meaningful reason why mixed schools are better. Very proud of those.
Thank you for that speech. Top 2.
You know, I don't think that the problem that exists with African American students is that they don't realize that they're suffering under attack, a very violent and visceral attack against broader society. The problem is that broader society isn't changing, even insofar as we create changes within the African American community within itself. Our claim is simple. There's a trade-off in this round, and that trade-off is better quality of teaching within these African American schools, where a very select group of individuals will be able to access that, versus better teaching within the curriculum overall, where those benefits are more likely to have a larger impact on societal change in the long run. And we think that is the most valuable thing in this round. 2 things I'm going to discuss. First of all, I want to talk a little bit more about broader society. Second of all, I'm going to talk about how this affects the child's development. So, on broader society, I just want to reiterate what John brought you, because I think it was remarkably important. First of all, I think it's important for you to understand that many of these schools don't have a formalized African American curriculum, but rather develop organically over time. So when they teach past historical events like Thanksgiving, they decide to teach a First Nations event, or First Nations perspective, because they have First Nations children within the classroom. Because that teacher is First Nations, for instance. These are all reasons why there are organic changes within curriculums, both within these African American schools and within regular schools. What is the implication of this? We suggest that in a world in which there is massive flight both of students and of teachers from these large institutions that are generally catering to a larger spectrum of people, you lose that diversity of viewpoints for individuals who that racism really does actually viscerally exist in. No, thank you. These are the kinds of people who need to understand that these things exist, that significant racism has affected their friends. And we suggest that it's important that that happens earlier in a person's life, where it's formative, rather than in a part in which it's later, where the preconceived biases are already entrenched, where they already have confirmation bias, where they discount many of these different issues. So if you want to create a change, the most significant actors are those who hold power, those who assert structural racism, those who do exist in law firms predominantly, who exist in large investment banks, who exist in the political sphere in a dominating way. These people need to be able to actually accept other individuals who are disadvantaged in order to get larger structural reforms like policy change, like better hiring practices of people. And that means that you need to ensure that there's some change within schools for white kids, not just schools for African Americans. The second thing that I want to observe, though, is that this is also the time in which children are the most malleable. I just want to contest the framing that structural racism is as large as it is in these circumstances. We agree that structural racism is a problem, but in schools, that's the least likely, no thank you, place to be a problem. It is more likely that you get African American, no thank you, class presidents who can dispel those notions when you're growing up with someone and you become friends with them, where you haven't already been segregated in social experience, so you don't know what it's like being friends with someone of a different race, or you don't have that inbuilt childhood friend who will actually signal to you. So these are all important reasons why the integration that exists, no thank you, is going to be diminished. And that the stakeholder that we're talking about is the most important, because they're the ones who control the reins of power. And that suggests that perhaps the best way to deal with structural racism is not from outside of the system, but from within the system, making those incremental changes which are necessary.
But you're still in the system. Lots of teaching methods, curricula pioneered at Morehouse that would never be put in other universities, but then transferred after their success into other programs. There's no reason why there's no bleed over from these ideas like curriculum projects?
No, but our argument is there's no incentive to do so when those students don't exist there and when those teachers don't exist so. So even in a world in which you can get crossover, you're suggesting a world in which we pre-up an incentive to do so. So that, I think, sufficiently shows you that there's broader societal effects, and I think those broader societal effects are larger, no thank you, because it affects the whole of society. I mean, pretty straightforward tautology. So, second, how does this affect the child's development? I think that we need to make a trade-off here, because they say that there's significant academic discrimination that hurts these children. But I want to note that these schools are going to be perceived as worse. I want to elaborate more on what John told you. Because I think, first of all, this creates a paradigm in which these schools aren't educational institutions, but rather cultural institutions, which I think is relevant, and I think insofar as people stop believing that these are places where people are challenged intellectually and forced to consider a diversity of viewpoints, and rather are confronted with things that they're familiar with. Second of all, I think that those fears of grade inflation are going to happen. They say people, like teachers, have biases. That means that college admissions officers who see these children who get higher grades within these kinds of schools will suspect it's grade inflation because you can't regulate every public school and say that this isn't a credible, well-respected school that has respectable marketing practices. No, thank you. So all those harms that they identify which exist at the high school level are symmetric at the university level, and we suggest that they get exacerbated when they say, look, the performance of the student in this African-American school is much higher than an African-American school and a regular African-American student in a regular school. The natural supposition, I think, is going to be about grade inflation, and that's going to suggest that you shouldn't admit that child in the future. So, no thank you. Even insofar as they might get better academic performance, it doesn't translate into anything. John gives you further links which aren't rebutted. The fact that you have strong connections that exist within these schools with people who are powerful and can get new employment in the long run. The fact that you have more donor bases in lots of these white neighborhoods. So all of these suggestions put out that there's probably going to be less of an effective translation of academic performance into real life skills from the government. The second thing that they talk about is why oftentimes in these kinds of circumstances, you have an ability to teach children about racism, and that is more important, no thank you, at that level rather than later on in life. Here's the important thing to note. At this age, you have the most capability to be able to learn about the kind of social mores which are necessary. Don't let them characterize this as aggressive racism. It's me as a Chinese kid being able to talk about rap music with my white friends because they like that rap music and being able to communicate with them. It's not necessarily about overt racism or engaging in overt racism, but it's about understanding the same cultural references, the same kinds of things that connect people so that you can relate to one another. And those implicit social mores need to be taught at an early age. The second thing that I want to note is they say that you can just simply get that integration effect by interacting with broader society. But surely that argument is symmetric. If you can get that broader effect by interacting with white society, you can probably get the cultural benefits that they're suggesting on their side by engaging with African American society. So there's no clear reason as to why it would only apply to one, but not the other. Surely that means that you're able to get the benefits that they suggest of integration and learning from interacting with African American society outside of your mixed schools. The final thing that they kind of note here is that there's a significant ability to identify with your identity, okay? I think the problem with this argument is it presupposes everyone wants to identify with their identity. That is to say, some people want to assimilate into mainstream society. I think that's perfectly acceptable. We should be choice neutral as to who these people are. The difficulty that John points out is that the vast majority of their life will be centered in this one way. The final observation that I want to make is that there will be some students who are left behind and hurt, because there are structural reasons like not being able to go to that school that's 20 minutes farther away, and that means that all these students suffer the exact same crimes I've identified and that they've identified, but much worse on their side of the house. Because they don't actually solve the problem, we're very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank the speaker for their speech, and indeed all speakers in the top 1, 3.
Opening government explains why it's good to have black teachers, because they're your role models to grade you better and they can celebrate better black history in classes. To which opening opposition responds, yeah, but we will still have black teachers, we will still have role models, however there will be fewer of them. Then opening opposition says, but it's good to be a minority within your own school because you will learn how to deal with racism, you will be able to shape the curriculum. CG extensions specifically on why being a minority in your own school is detrimental for the development of a child, and secondly why it's detrimental for the curricula that they are experiencing. So on the development of the child, two things in this point: racist bullying and then on retaliation and puberty, all were well integrated and flagged. So racist bullying is something that actively and constantly is faced by black students in the United States. For three reasons. First of all, white students have explicit racism. They're told by their alt-right parents that black people are bad, they are dumb, that they're less worthy. That means that you're more likely to pick those black students out to bully against them. Second of all, we think that you just stand out as a minority inherently. We think that puberty is a time that is about bullying, about trying to get others to make sure that you're not the one being bullied, and therefore you seek someone who is somewhat weak. If you are already in that position, because you're of a different skin color, because society has normalized bullying those people, they're more likely to be bullied. And thirdly, because we will see segregation happening within school, because given that this happens, you're more likely to sit together with your black friends during lunchtime, and those things. That means that you're making yourself a minority. Once again, that means that racist bullying is something that happens every single day. What does it mean? Three main impacts. First of all, we see that bullying is detrimental for the development of teenagers because you're not in a safe environment. The feeling of ostracism literally triggers survival fears in the brain because back in like evolutionary times, it could mean when you're ostracized in the group, you're not surviving. It makes you extremely scared of your environment, extremely hostile to that environment, and therefore you're simply less likely to perform well because you don't dare to speak out. You don't feel safe. But secondly, it means that opening opposition to the idea of you're going to be able to deal with racism is simply bullshit. Because you cannot deal with racism because the entire group is against you. Because if you're being bullied, you will have to go to a principal who is most likely to be white and therefore won't see the problem. Right? That the higher ups within those schools are often white. That means that you won't learn how to deal with racism. It will simply be ingrained in your own system, in your own thinking about yourself. And thirdly, it means opening opposition says, but you will need to network in your life to get jobs later on. Because you need to be friends with white people. But you're not going to be that person because they're not seeing you as part of them. They're ostracizing you from that group. Therefore, you won't achieve all these benefits, but you will definitely harm your development. Closing.
Do you think there might be any other kinds of bullying that go on within these exclusively African American schools? Like might there be sexist bullying or homophobic bullying?
Definitely, but right now you start linking your ethnic identity to being bullied, right? To being not being part of society. That means that you feel much less secure because it is constantly reinforced not only between the walls of your school, but between the nation's borders. You feel this much stronger. You come home, you see it all the time. That means it's much worse. Second point, on retaliation and puberty. We think that one of the characteristics of teenagers is that they feel fucked by adults. Now, that's much stronger for black people in mixed schools. Why? Because you're not rated on your full capacity. You see that you're trying your very best, but a teacher is just not appreciating you. Secondly, because you see that white teachers are more likely to accept racist bullying and not acknowledge it as a problem. That means that this feeling of feeling fucked by society is much stronger, and therefore you're less likely to want to opt in to those structures of society. That means you're more likely to retaliate against it, and therefore distance yourself from the system, distance yourself from homework, distance yourself from the entire system, which means you're more likely to drop out and you're going to perform much worse in high school. We think that specifically is a function of racism at such a young age, and therefore we need to prevent it at all costs. Second point within this extension speech on curricula, because opening opposition says black students and black teachers in mixed schools are going to be able to form curricula. That's bullshit because they are the minority within that school, right? That means that they're not part of the white people on the school board. They feel bullied and disenfranchised, and therefore they don't dare to speak up. They don't dare to say they want a different curriculum. But moreover, if they've never had a proper curriculum, they don't even know what they're missing, right? That means that they don't dare to be active. Now, opening government talks about how black schools are going to celebrate black history. I want to look at the other side of the comparative, namely how white schools deal with this, right? Because they're actively ignoring their own faults in the process. There's a lot of schools in the south of the US that do not talk about slavery when they talk about the Civil War, that portray the Black Panthers as terrorists rather than people who are acting in self-defense. We think that's terrible. But let's be a bit like grateful to, oh, let's make a comparative. Because on their side of the house, they're going to have somewhat better curricula in white schools, versus on our side of the house, we're going to have awesome curricula in black schools. Now, those better curricula in white schools aren't going to matter because they won't solve racism, right? They won't change the society because it's such an extremely complex problem that simply a few other lessons at school are not going to change the problem. However, what then does it mean for those black students? It means that you see and feel all the time that society is against you, that you cannot progress as far as you would like to, but you don't completely understand why. You don't comprehend the complexity behind it. And that as a result makes you feel completely powerless within your shoes because you see that this racist system is against you, but you can't fight against it. On our side of the house, however, you understand it. That means three things. First of all, you know when to escape those structures. You know to recognize racist structures, and therefore you're able to escape them, to go to a different company, to go and escape those structures. Secondly, it means that you're more likely to organize yourself. You organize yourself from a feeling of understanding this and this is what white people did to us, and therefore we need to fight back. That's much less likely to happen if you feel powerless because you're being told that slavery didn't exist. And thirdly, it is crucial for your self-image to understand why society is against you, to understand how all of this happened and how history led to shape the current society as it is today. On our side of the house, we will have only black students, only black teachers within schools that are made for this system, rather than hoping that black minority teenagers are going to have the political power to shape curricula of high schools. I think that's a very false hope. You shouldn't have that as OO. We're very proud to propose.
Thank you for their speech. All three.
Too many arguments. I thought you said there were too many off you, and I was like, come on.
About the time of place.
That would be an interesting strand to take.
Key issue in this round is when you're in a mixed environment, you learn to embrace both your differences but also the things that make you similar to one another. The problem with their model is that you only learn to think of yourself as different, and that's true for both black individuals and white individuals. A couple of independent points of rebuttal. Firstly, directly to closing government on the issue of bullying. The sad fact is kids bully kids for all sorts of reasons, right? Their height, their weight, what clothes they wear, how wealthy they are, etc., etc., etc. There's nothing to suggest that bullying would be any less in their environment than there is in ours. What they say implicitly is that racist bullying is worse. I say implicitly because both teams essentially across the dub bench just assert that when it's from the racial identity, that's worse for some ways. It makes you out to be different. The problem is, what makes you out to be different is when you say, we need to segregate ourselves because we are different, right? They are not one and the same. So even when we accept that principle, we say they make that kind of identity worse because you reinforce the idea that you are not actually the same as these people. You're not humans, no thank you, but rather you are very different, right? You're different species. We know on this point as well that even as kids, on the Gov, what they fail to recognise is you don't just go from your house, magically get transported to school, magically get transported to your all-black church, and then magically get transported back home, right? You walk places, you go to the arcades, you go to, sports activities, etc., where there are going to be white kids, right? And now here's the issue. At a young age, when you haven't interacted with white kids on a day-to-day basis, which I'll expand on in a bit of time, you are now confronted as a young person who, as Gov said, are more likely to succumb to not being confident, not being sure how to deal with these issues, but you've not even interacted positively with these people before. Conversely, what you've said is the whites are so against us that we need to segregate ourselves, right? Equally, white people are told blacks think so little of you, think you're such evil people, they're not even willing to send their kids to the same school as you. Putting aside the fact that they fought against segregation for so long, they think it's so bad that they're going to segregate themselves. What kind of bullying do you get in that environment? What kind of bullying do you get in those clubs and societies on the day-to-day street when a black kid walks by? Do you think that that's going to be any better than it is now? No, it's clearly going to be far worse, and these kids are not equipped to dealing with it, right? We stay on that issue of bullying, however, in mixed schools. Bullying, it's not rampant in the way these guys say, where you can just call a kid an N-word and say that slavery didn't exist, and the white teachers are like, la 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 la, I'm not hearing what's going on, right? Quite clearly, the world has got better, and this is a very important point to note, by the way. This is not 1960s America anymore, right? Whether it be through specific issues, such as like the kneeling situation in the NFL, or issues about how black people are underpaid, or for example, like lots of studies and people coming forward and more black politicians voicing, and white politicians actually as well voicing these issues. Clearly we're in a better position than we were years ago, right? Therefore, these kinds of things do get called out. Do they get called out as much as we want? No. Can we help with that? Yes. Does this help with that? No. Because one, you get fewer black kids. Therefore, if there are some black kids in school who are getting bullied, there's less of an incentive to protect them because there's fewer voices complaining about it. But also, if there are no black kids at school, right, and people are like, oh yeah, blacks are so stupid, aren't they? Yeah, they are pretty stupid, right? Who's going to call that out? Who's going to complain about that, right? Those views then continue. You don't just magically not become a racist when you turn up in the workplace, which these guys seem to assume. No, thank you. So why is it that even on this point of performance, that black students perform better in mixed schools? Firstly, they benefit from white people and white people's knowledge. I, for example, and Lucia as well, right, and Shrishti in this case, and lots of you, actually, it's a very multicultural room, have benefited massively from white debaters, right? We've seen some of the excellent things that they can do, and we benefit from that, right? In the same way at school, when you see the way that people are talking, the way that how to hold a fork and knife, how to discuss particular issues, discuss art, right? For example, as a brown person, we don't really deal with art, right, as a concept, as much as what a lot of white people do. The point is, these things don't just not become important. When you get to any work environment, people are expecting these kinds of issues to be discussed. When you're trying to make the way, especially in the professional world, they're discussed. But if you learn those skills at school by interacting with white people who know about that, and who at that age are so innocent that they don't see you as different, they just say, oh, you know, this is, by the way, how you hold a fork and knife, and this is how you use it, right? Oh, you eat with your hands. How do you do that? And it becomes like a learning, like sharing of cultural experiences. Secondly, we benefit from white people's money and political capital. The schools are obviously better because white parents who are generally richer, right, even in the poorer neighborhoods, don't want their kids going to shit schools. Therefore, more money gets put in, more resources, more textbooks, more teachers, etc., right? Secondly, why else is commingling so important? I'll take this here, yes.
Look, as you yourself point out, you're going to meet white people everywhere and you can learn from them there. But what we'd rather do is in an educational environment, you think of yourself as valuable rather than think that you can never be as smart as a white class president.
Yeah, the problem is when you separate them out, imagine they said to you, you can't compete against EPL people, you can only compete against ESL people. Do you think you would have come out thinking you could beat EPL people? No, because you were put in that environment. That's why you've been segregated. Also, at what point in your magical model do you suddenly understand how and build relationships with white people, right? Like when you've been segregated for such a long period of time. No, thank you, right? What happens in commingled situations is you have so much in common, right? Because the fact is, black kids and white kids, or Asian kids or whatever, a lot of them will love sport, a lot of them will obviously love their family, a lot of them will hate how annoying their teacher is. Those are things they can bond over as humans, as people, right? That creates relationships, that creates links. Secondly, you appreciate those differences and how to deal with it. I've already talked about food and how you hold forks and knives and things like that. But it's also like, oh, in your culture, you celebrate this particular thing, or, you know, black people, you seem to be a bit louder than white people. That's quite interesting. Let's talk about that. Why is that? Oh, it's because of X, Y, and Z, right? You don't get those conversations in entirely white schools or entirely black schools. That understanding never comes about, right? Why is it so important to do that at a young age? One, I will explain why kids are far less prejudiced at that age, right? They're innocent. They see their friend, they don't even see them as a black friend until much later because they don't see that as an issue. But when you build those positive relationships at that age, that's when you get that like non-racism existing, because it's hard for someone who has interacted with black people from a young age in a positive manner to suddenly become racist later. It can happen, but it's far less likely. It's more likely that in our world, as we are progressing at the moment in the status quo, with the more positive interactions, with the more understanding of these issues, for white people as well to campaign for political action, for black people to feel they can support and ask for the support of white people. You reduce that on their side of the house. The fact is, there's a massive gap in their case, right? Because they say, look, let's segregate you out, let's make you confident in the fact that you can't compete with white people, but suddenly you'll be able to interact positively with them afterwards, and then the world will become a better place. It doesn't. That's why we ended segregation in the first place. Very much.
Opposition idea that avoiding segregation will help circumstances of people of color is true if and only if either of the following is true. 1. Existing social structures in society allow students to thrive on the long run if they were not to segregate themselves, or the status quo developments will be fast enough so that in the long term people can actually benefit from the things that they say will accrue. Even if they say that things have gotten better in the last couple of years, we don't think that it is enough to make sure that these people have more opportunities in at least in a sizable amount of people in the African American community, and that is why Joop and I are in favor. Look, we regret that integration hasn't materialized in the way that we wanted it to, but we think that we have been working within the system for years and all these benefits have not accrued. We think that is for a reason. In my speech, I'm going to talk about two things. Clash number one, why in the large majority of cases, the circumstances aren't such that if you integrate yourself, or better as they would want to assimilate yourself, you actually have all those opportunities. Second of all, why we think the Black American community will be less divided once we actually have people look at their own community with pride and create their own history. In broad lines, look, we clash with closing opposition in the sense that our contention is that the structures that make this look like othering yourself, as they say, are going to be precisely the ones that are still going to other yourself, and at least you have more opportunities under our side of the house. So, what gives children the most opportunities? We, throughout the opposition, hear the ludicrous contention, right, that at mixed schools you get the cultural benefits because of the mores that you learn, because interacting with people is going to teach you all sorts of things. But we think their characterization is totally wrong. We start with that in opening opposition, right? They say, yeah, if you have a couple of First Nation students in your class, then you're going to be inclined to, teach Thanksgiving in a different way. You're going to take those hoop into account. But this kind of thing does not exist, right? What we see is that when parents from First Nations communities say, this is not what happened at Thanksgiving, often we say that these people are nagging, they're overreacting, that it wasn't such a big deal, right? So by and large, if there's anything that happens, right, it is that the teacher's body is the one waving away the complaints by parents and the needs that these people have. This is dramatically important, right? Because we think, first of all, we have to look at the likelihood that all of these things are going to happen. But we think that we have pretty much a guarantee under our side of the house that these things are not going to happen, right? We have a guarantee that teachers are not going to say they're overreacting because Black History Month is something that everyone at that school presumably thinks is important. Second of all, we think that the mores that you actually learn is not that, oh, this is how you use Western cutlery, right? We think that the actual mores that you're going to be learning is that you need to be submissive, that you're an aggressive person if you stand up for yourself. This is the kind of treatment that many Black girls get in school, why they get detention, why they get disproportionate disproportionate disciplinary measures because they behave in a way that is so incongruent with what the rest of the people behave, sort of mores. That's why we don't want people to adapt to the mores of the rest of society. If school tells you that you need to shut up when you're being treated in a different way, if school tells you that all of those sorts of things are the things you need to adapt to, what they're standing for is not integration, it is assimilation and the erasure of the kinds of behavior that you want to have. I think third of all, the curriculum is not just that they say, oh yeah, you can also teach some things about community figures. No, it is that often well-meaning but still very biased teachers shut them out because they don't know about the accomplishments of a lot of people. That is why that is why on our side of the house we wouldn't let that decision up to a wide-run school board in the first place. These are all the sorts of things that Job talks about, why it is so incredibly important that you don't say, we're going to adapt to what you guys want from us, because what we see is that it tarnishes the reputation of the black community, right? We don't want generations of people growing up thinking that they need to be submissive in all sorts of places and that they need to code switch constantly, right? We think that we get more students who are confident in what they are and who they are under eyes of the house. That is the one benefit. But then we go on, right? Because they say, yeah, they're going to think that these schools do great inflation, and that is why they sort of nullify all the academic benefits that opening government brings. We think that's ludicrous because obviously no one cares about sort of the numerical result, right? But what matters is that actually students are not put down. Students are not simply thought as less intelligent because they speak in a different way. Look, there is a reason why 1 in 3 court translators is not able to understand the gist of what black defenders are saying. It is because you share such different vernaculars. It is because you speak in such a different way that often teachers are not even able to recognize the brilliance of the students that are right in front of them. This is why it's so important, right? Because in these schools, these are teachers who can advise their students to go to AP classes or to take IP classes. No, thank you. This is a reason that under our side of the house, talent actually does get spotted, at least in African American students that wouldn't have those opportunities otherwise. And then last, you miss out on connections, and that's why you shouldn't other yourself. Look, we think that the structures that allow you to be discriminated in the ways that I've outlined also mean that people are not likely to give you connections in the first place. It doesn't matter if you went to a mixed school in a relatively white neighborhood, simply because it means that if you were already bottom of the class or likely to be not in the top of your class, people are going to value us as important. So it simply doesn't matter, right? What we need is people to be able to hone their skills, become independent thinkers who can then stand up for themselves. Lastly, no thank you, how does the African American community improve by and large? Look, there is a reason why when I went to my high school, which was a select high school, I had to constantly say that I was one of 3 children in the Netherlands who had a 100% score at their admission test. And it was because of the following. I have a black surname, right? My dad is a person of color who constantly gets compliments on how well he speaks Dutch. We think that if you are constantly esteemed as less worthy, if you think that, oh, you're so brave for doing all these sorts of things, we think that this is something that uniquely, no thank you don't have to do. This is why we no longer pit different African Americans against each other. Because people who are African American, who can adapt themselves because they have the economic means, for example, to pass as almost white, or people who are African American but have means to go to preparatory colleges, are people who are able to assimilate, right? Are able to ride on the coattails of the implicit racism that makes them different than other African American people. Under our side of the house, we changed that incentive, right? If African American parents, by and large, send their children to schools where they hone these sorts of things, they're not going to feel ashamed. They don't think that they need to adapt because they don't think anymore that they need to be different or that they need to be exactly like the white kids are in order to have a successful academic career. This is one of the few things that we tell you, and also we think that that means that we have community leaders in the African American community who can tell that they are confident about their community, that they no longer have to forsake their traditions and the things that their grandparents did, for example, and this is why people become more proud of their community. Under our side of the house, we think that we stand for people being proud of who they are and successful as who they are versus having to assimilate and give up many of the things that make them unique and make them brilliant and simply not recognize as the kind of schools that these guys stand for. Therefore, terribly proud to oppose.
That's for his speaker.
things in the speech. I'm going to talk to you about how interactions shape identity in my first form. Secondly, I'm going to look at the educational impact and the way this plays out on either side of the house. Finally, I'm going to look at the long-term outcomes, the bigger sort of macro level outcomes, etc. But first I want to do a few key pieces of framing. Look, on both sides of the house, irrespective of what kind of school you're in, either a mixed school or a segregated one, you will interact with people from the other race, right? So a lot of their benefits rely on a lot of sort of government's benefits relies on the following formulation. You go to a black school, which is a safe space, and it teaches you about your culture and identity. That then empowers you in about X number of years' time, by the time you apply for university or jobs, to then be confident enough in your identity to be perceived as an equal in the workplace. Unfortunately, what they miss out is all the various other bits of time in your life, every single day, that you will interact as a black kid or as a white kid with kids of other races. What happens to the interaction there? And that is what's most important. Because it may well be true that, after 10 years of an Afrocentric education, you become confident in that particular aspect of your identity. But what does Stephen tell you? When you go from your house to your black school, and then to the black church and back, what happens to all the times in between when you mix with kids who are from other races? What you have now done is effectively taught kids of all races, or taught both white and black kids, that there is no meaningful way in which you can interact with this other person, because you just don't know how to. There are no black kids in your class to teach you about all the things that make you similar and or different. Why is this really important? And this is the key thing that Stephen tells you, right? Because we are talking about, in terms of interaction, we're talking about kids who are very young. And I just simply dispute the fact that when you first go to school, I don't know what age you go to school in America, like let's say it's about 5 or 6, right? Like at that age, you just go in and think, well, my white parents have taught me that that black kid is an other. That's just not how it works, right? When you're very, very young, your interactions are purely at the level of, does this kid eat, does this kid like the same kind of music as I do? Or is this kid fun? Does this kid run fast? Right? All of those things. When you're in a mixed school, you learn both how to interact on the basis of your similarity and your commonality, i.e. you really hate that teacher and that homework is really lame, or that film was really cool, as well as on the basis of your difference, i.e. if you're an Indian kid, you eat protein, you eat it with your hands, or you're, I don't know, like a, whatever, I don't know how white people eat, like with their hands or whatever, I don't know. But basically, the point is that you have those interactions not in segregated, isolated instances, right? You have them as part of your regular interaction. This is my friend who likes this film I like, or the sport I like, but also celebrates this other festival, or also, speaks English in a slightly different way. That is important because this is then what carries you through the rest of your life when you interact in other situations such as the workplace. Now, why is this particularly crucial? Because let's look at the question of bullying, and I think Stephen deals with it really well, right? Yeah. Which is right now, their contention is that the major reason why black kids have a hard time in school is because of racial bullying or racial difference. Now, when you have segregated schools, you effectively set up racial echo chambers on both sides of the house, right? So maybe it's true that a white kid does not intuitively understand that the reason why the black kid is being bullied is on racial grounds, but they will definitely understand that their friend is being bullied and stand up for them. And that is how you get empathy that you don't under your side of the house. No, thank you. On your side of the house, the message you send is, if you're being bullied, and you will be bullied for literally anything because kids are shit, if you're being bullied, the solution is for your parent to remove you and put you in an isolated space, rather than to encourage these kind of empathy exchanges. Yes, go.
Yeah, so you could make friends with the white kids at football, or they could be racist to you. But at least on our side, if they're racist, you could go to school and have the techniques and support strategies that don't take 15 years.
Here's the thing, Matt. There is no inherent reason why those kids at football will be racist unless you have never given them an opportunity to interact with someone who has a different skin tone to them. So even if they're not going to go look at a kid and say N-word, they might still treat them differently or poorly because you've literally taken these kids out of your system and put them in a completely different system. No thanks. When you create schools that are Afrocentric, you also by definition create schools that are white-centric, right? You never give an opportunity for this interaction to take place. But also, look, let's look at a little bit more detail in terms of the kind kind of education exchanges that you do get. The difficulty with opening opposition's case, which is very good, is that they tell you the things are really bad on both sides of the house. What they don't tell you is the critical framing that Stephen gives you, which is that things are getting better now. What does that mean? When you talk about, sure, like race relations in America are shit, right? But what is different is that there is a greater awareness of these issues, both in terms of the kind of education we have, so like the academic discussion and research, as well as people just being more aware of things like, police brutality being a racial issue, etc., and so on and so forth. What does that mean? Now is uniquely a bad time for parents to turn to segregation as a way of trying to deal with bullying or with difference or with the teaching of identity, right? What happens when you have kids who grow up together in these schools, or when you have an emphasis, in society in general to talk about racial awareness, is that, say, police brutality does not just become specifically, a black issue, or black culture does not just become the thing that those people in those schools study. It becomes an issue that all Americans should read about and should learn about. And more importantly, right, like, if you're correct in that, in a fundamentally sort of like white predominant society, the things that you learn in terms of, say, how to behave in the workplace, or the skills that white interviewers will value, those are skills you can better pick up from white people rather than from black people, right? Like, because those are the people who have the strengths, because those are the people who have those particular ways of behaving. But more importantly, you'll also notice that all the policy benefits that we hear, will appear out of a non-segregated world are all reliant on the analysis that Stephen gives you, which is to say that if you're someone who growing up did not, had black friends or had friends from other races, and you called out kids when they were being treated poorly, when you see that in the workplace, you call out bullying then, right? When you grow up as a white kid reading about African literature and African culture, because it's not just something that's taught in African schools, then you become more articulate when you bring up these issues in public as a political leader, for instance, right? All of the benefits that they assert only become true when you bring in the analysis that Stephen gives you. Look, at the end of the day, you will have to interact with people from other races. This is the best way to do it. Segregation does not work with lecture posts.
I still put them from Ireland as well.
Because we were late, so